Breaking the cycle to step forward. Authentic conversations from lived experience and a professional perspective in overcoming abuse with Chris Tuck and Beverley Ann.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Breaking the Cycle to Step Forward podcast with myself, Chris Tuck, and my co-host, the lovely
Beverley Ann. Hello.
Hi Beverley. And today we've got a special guest, Lucy Duckworth, who works at the Survivors Trust currently. But we're just going to hand over to Lucy and find out a little bit about who she is, about her background, her childhood, and then we'll carry on the conversation.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for having me, both of you. I'm Lucy. I work at the Survivors Trust as policy advisor. But before that, I was privileged enough to be on the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse for 8 years alongside Chris. And prior to that, I did a lot of work in with the Church of England and the Catholic Church, working in a charity that supported abusers who had experienced it in faith institutions. And even prior to that, if you can possibly believe there was a prior to that, I started my adult life as a primary school teacher, qualified teacher, and was volunteering in the sector alongside. But as I think most of us here, once you see the scale of the problem, it becomes a full-time issue. And it also very much overlapped with my teaching as well, being a lot of frustration at not being able to help the children much more holistically than that they needed, that I wasn't able to do.
How long was you a primary school teacher for, Lucy?
7 years, maybe.
Wow.
So I did. I did early years, and then I went into SEN, so that's special educational needs. So I did a lot of qualifications and working with children with severe autism who were unable to communicate, and I was doing my sign language, and that was just at the time that everything was coming to a head about the abuse of Jimmy Savile was being exposed, and the campaign for the inquiry really ramped up a gear. And also at that time I was, I'd been in teaching long enough where you were sort of having to move up, and that wasn't an option with the volunteering work I was doing. So I was very happy to.
What volunteering role was you doing and why?
So I was volunteering for an organisation called MACSAS, which is Minister and Clergy Sexual Abuse Survivors, led by some absolutely everybody there was volunteers, absolutely incredible team of people. All of us had experienced child sexual abuse in faith organisations. So for me, I was abused by both a Catholic and a Church of England priest. And so, you know, as part of your disclosure journey, I just don't really like the word journey, but you reach out to people. I always remember just assuming, like I was, you know, really young, but just assuming that when I thought, I'm going to tell people about what's happened to me, like, obviously everyone will go, oh my goodness. I honestly had no idea that I was one of many, let alone thousands, let alone, well, sadly millions now. And I just remember being really shocked when I did what we can talk about this in a bit, but I do think when you're abused within a faith institution, it's every type of abuse has its own obviously its own different context, but within the faith institution, it's like a whole community, and a lot of people go straight to the church to say it, expecting they'll get a response back that just says, oh, we're so sorry. But as we know, it's been very well documented, the church did anything but that. I don't hold a faith. I haven't held a faith since I was a child, and I don't know how much the abuse had to do with that, but certainly not now. And I think that makes it very tricky when you're trying to get some feedback from the institution that harmed you so much, because they don't see you as part of their community.
And Lucy, thank you for that, because it's really interesting to hear from the faith side as well, because it's something that is not talked about a lot, you know, and there's a lot of expectation within faith and communities, isn't there? So
It really is, yeah.
yeah, if you're comfortable, what kind of upbringing did you have?
I was very lucky. I mean, you know, we had everything we needed. We weren't particularly well off. Two older sisters. My mum was a nurse and worked extremely hard every hour she could. Yeah, we had, you know, the usual secondhand bikes, loving family, but I became very ill very young, and no one was sure why. Obviously now we know. Our local school was a church school, and this is back in the 80s. So
Yeah.
to get into the church school, you had to have a referral from the local priest, and our local priest was only too happy to befriend our family and ensure that he could, you know, obviously my family were victims as well, and told them that he would be able to make sure that we could get into the local school. He was convicted in '99 for different types of abuse to different people, and I often say we must never desensitize to it. We all know that the situation now is absolutely appalling, but abuse in the 80s and 90s was done in a very different way. Obviously, it's evolved now, and it's online, and grooming is a lot more subtle. But you know, back then, this guy had a reputation. Everyone knew never to be left alone with him. You know, it horrifies me that all the teachers, everyone knew about it. When you come forward, no one goes, really? I'm surprised. And that was the culture then. I suppose now the danger is actually, because in dismantling that culture and making it that you're not allowed to have a reputation like that, actually we've almost made abusers hide a bit more, which makes it a bit harder to track. But yeah, I mean, that's the way it was, and my story will be one of thousands, millions. I was very, very lucky to have a loving home to go to, and I know many people don't have that. And even despite the confusion and the illness and everything, I think that's what managed to keep my head above water.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that.
I was going to say, Lucy, what was the impact on your family? Did your mum, your sisters believe what had happened to you? How did it land?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very close to them to this day, and I would obviously like them to answer that fully. But I suppose when I told everyone what had happened, I was 26, which is still relatively young, as we know. Takes 20-25 years normally to disclose. But I could just no longer live with the impact. Mine wasn't about wanting to stop it happening to other people. I was just falling apart with the trauma. And they were very confused, and they were very upset, and there was a lot of confusion in our relationships. But ultimately, I've never been closer now to my mum and my sisters. And in time, I think there was a bit of a penny dropping and going, oh, that explains, because as I said, I had an unusual amount of physical and mental health issues from a young child, and nobody knew why. And now obviously we do.
What was that impact, Lucy? Can you share with us a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, when I was 11, I just couldn't walk. No one knew why.
Wow.
Just literally couldn't walk to school where I was being abused, couldn't walk to church where I was being abused. I mean, the mind just, you
makes so much sense, though, doesn't it?
But I honestly remember the pain. Like, I remember just my legs were in so much pain. They tried everything. I was in hospital for weeks. I was in a wheelchair.
Wow.
I was in a wheelchair for about 3 months, and then we always laugh about this, but it's not very funny. But the summer holidays after school ended, so, you know, primary school, I was on holiday, and I was on the beach, and my friends were down on the beach. I just got out my wheelchair and walked down. So of course everyone thought I was faking it.
Putting it on. Yeah.
Of course I wasn't. It was just a real trauma response. I had
Wow.
unexplained seizures throughout my teenage years. So I was diagnosed with epilepsy, and this is before scans. So they won't have been able to, they weren't able to fully understand. And I have no doubt that was a trauma response. And then, like many survivors, relied on a lot of substance misuse in my late teens, early 20s. And that's when I realized that couldn't continue. So
Yeah.
I was very lucky to get the help I did, and obviously hugely interrupted my teaching career at the time. I had to take a lot of time off. It was a kind of just a pause, a reset. Don't really like the words that breakdown, but it was a just can't do this anymore. Breakthrough
type. Yeah.
That's what we call it.
That's what we call it now.
And and then I was like, right. I mean, I'd always performed really badly at school as well. So I was like, right, I'm gonna go back to school and understand this. I'm someone that just wants to learn stuff, especially if so. Yeah, and then I got back in, did my master's in child psychotherapy and understanding the effects of trauma, and published my dissertation on the impact on the child from a psychotherapy point of view, which is very interesting because everyone's, therapy is very, there's counselling, there's therapists, there's psychotherapists, there's psychologists, there's all these different, everyone, and everyone thinks theirs is the best. So I wanted to explore the different options of what therapy works and why and how and its roots. So I looked at Freud and how he was the first person to register the impact of trauma on the adult, but also made it worse in doing that. And and at the same time, Chris, that's when I was around that time I was meeting you, and we were joining the inquiry and all the fun that
making
came.
some noise.
Making some noise, getting our death threats and all the rest of it in those early months. And here we are. It's been a long journey.
Before we move on, your published paper, can anyone read that, Lucy, or not?
I think it's on yes they can.
Okay, so we'll get the link.
It's on academia. I can send you the link.
We'll get the link off you and include it down below our podcast. So and I just wanted to go back to the patterns of moving perpetrators around, and I first got to know about this through you, obviously, but also by watching the Boston Globe program. Can you tell us a little bit about what faith organizations tend to do with their perpetrators? I
mean, the first thing is, and the biggest issue that particularly the Church of England has, but actually also the Catholic Church, is that when a priest discloses to another priest that they have abused somebody or are thinking about it, nothing is done. And that's an issue in all our frontline services. As we know, we're calling for mandatory reporting, but I am reassured, and I know as a former teacher, that in areas such as education and social work, there's a lot of training, and the policy is it should be done, and it is. But faith institutions very much shut down, and there are countless. I could not go through them all now. There are countless examples, particularly in the southeast of England. It was in the Chichester diocese in the 70s and 80s, where loads of priests who were accused of this or had admitted doing it were just moved. They were simply moved to another parish. Of course, this is also before the internet, so there was no kind of research into who they were, what they'd done. And if their reputation followed them, they would simply change their name. We're told that doesn't happen now. We don't have much evidence of it. It is an absolutely appalling stain on the Church of England, and an institution that is meant to be there providing morals for others is basically decriminalising sexual abuse.
Yeah.
They also have, so this was very much a case with mine the priest in my case, if you have been accused, even if you've been convicted and served time, as Guy Bennett had, you're not allowed to be defrocked. Defrocked is where they say you can no longer be a priest. The only way you can be defrocked in the Church of England is if you've committed adultery. So that is if you've had extramarital consensual affair with an adult. That means you're kicked out of the priesthood, but otherwise you don't. So sexual abuse of a child, sex with a minor, which is a term I absolutely hate. There's no such thing. But all of those very strange legal terms that we have don't mean anything in the Church of England. What they do is they take away your right to ministry. So you're not allowed to perform mass, or you're not allowed to, but you are still an ordained priest. You're still called a reverend, and their thinking of that is you were called by God to service, and only God can remove you. I mean, I
am speechless.
Yes, I was.
For me, God isn't making these men sexually abuse children. It's the men that are doing it. And look, that's what I can't get my head around.
I mean, this isn't, everyone's like, but he can't do that because he's a priest. We've got to stop thinking this way. Yeah. These men choose these jobs so that they get that position of trust, and so they get that unfettered access to children. The Guy Bennett, his name is, you can look him up. He's he was friends with all the artists and film people, and said that he was a chaplain for a London theatre, and he was hanging out with Rolf Harris and all of that. I just think we cannot underestimate the size of the circles of this back in the 70s, 80s and 90s. And I think that those circles we saw then have now obviously moved online, and you've got forums, and you've got just awful things happening on the dark web and on the clear web, unfortunately. But this is a power trip. It's nothing to do with sex. It's a power trip. And to get that full power trip, you need to talk about it and boast about it and share it with other people who are willing to do that. And until we start saying we need to start looking at our recruitment policies and stop producing generations of traumatized people who are then think it's okay to go on and continue that trauma, we're not gonna get a way out of this. I think the Church of England should be fined through the teeth, because they only care about their money. They're not going, arrests won't do anything.
But it's also amazing, when you speak to people, generally, when someone's been convicted, so you mentioned like Rolf Harris, first of all, because he's famous, it's disbelieved straight away. But even when he's convicted, even when there's, again, very young children involved, but it's then as if it's an isolated case, as if he doesn't mix with other people with the same, it's like, oh, no. And we know from a fact that if that one person is there, that's the tip of the iceberg. Have a look at who he actually is surrounding himself by, and the church is big for that. And I will say we've had other people on here from different faiths, so it doesn't matter what faith it is, it's prevalent in all faiths.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got some faiths that say it didn't happen if you didn't get a witness. Now we all know that that's obviously not possible. They've these abusers are clever, and they make sure that they've put things in place to get away with it. It's very rarely just an opportune crime. So
they've groomed everyone around them, haven't they?
Yeah, including the institution themselves. We had bishops that were implicated in either committing the abuse themselves or deliberately covering it up. And actually, the higher up it goes, you've got senior leaders of the church saying this can't have happened. And I'd like to say it's not happening today, but actually only this year they asked Professor Alexis Jay, who ran IICSA, to write a review of their safeguarding policy. Absolutely committed to getting this right. They're going to try again. And then it went to General Synod, and the bishop said, actually, we can't do that. It's just, it's jaw-dropping how elite people think they are above the law, and how they don't need to concern themselves with other people's suffering if it means that they're implicated in it. And it's a really scary culture that we have to change if we're going to tackle all sexual violence.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the things that we always ask people, because it's something that is really important, how do you look after yourself, Lucy, while you're involved in all of this work? Like you said, it's full time for you now.
It is. Well, I've got 2 little people in my house, so we have lots of at that age, the joy that singing about unicorns and making fairy houses brings is a very nice juxtaposition and change. I love to swim, and I write a lot. Actually, that's what helps me kind of get it out and just go, this is where I am now. I've also very much, I'd only sort of say in the last 2 years, really understood that this is just, you know, our efforts can only be as big as they can be, and we can't take on the whole responsibility. And while we want to do everything right now, this has to be a whole society effort. So knowing that means that actually, when it is time to turn the computer off, then you can turn it off and leave all that work under the closed lid, and we're not going to change this in our lifetime, unfortunately. So we're still going to make sure that we live and find joy in our life.
Absolutely. Now, you, as you said earlier, you're involved with IICSA with Chris, and it's like anything. The report came out, and we're still all active and work, but we also want to not allow IICSA to just disappear. So Act on IICSA is very important to all of us. Chris has got a card up for those watching us on video, and we will be hashtagging it as we do all the time, Act on IICSA. Would you like to share a little bit more about your thoughts about, and you know, how Act on IICSA came about?
I mean,
it's not going to work. I tried.
Yeah. Yes, and I'm sure Chris will remember this as well. You know, about a year before the inquiry ended, it was a hard slog. It's a hard job, and we were like, we can't do this. And I remember thinking, actually, there's no way we can leave now, because we're actually going to be part of something that's going to really make that difference and get the law changed. We all sat there for 8 years assuming that would happen. On the day the final report was published, Liz Truss resigned, so it didn't get the press it deserved. And what I have come to the difficult conclusion to realise is actually IICSA was just a response to a lot of noise in the public domain, and therefore there wasn't lots of noise in the public domain when it concluded because of the current political situation, and therefore why spend money or change something if there's not a big push to do so. So we realised that, and a group of us got together and said, right, we're going to have to, you know, really put a bit of pressure on to say let's do more. And the Survivors Trust said they would host it, and so we said, you know, we call it a campaign. It's literally just a hashtag. Our good friend Kate said, let's call it Act on IICSA, and there we are. Since that time, we've held a parliamentary event in Parliament, because that would be where you hold a parliamentary event, obviously, which the Home Secretary came to at the time. Look, we know that when we're having these meetings with ministers and they say, oh yes, absolutely, we're 100% behind it, we know that they've got a to-do list bigger than anyone can imagine, and they've got different priorities. And it is right that some of those priorities take over this. You know, I know, for example, talking to the Home Secretary's team, actually she's dealing with the borders and defence with what's going on at the moment. However, it's really important to make sure that they are still talking about this, and that they are still publicly accepting that there's a big problem. And there's two reasons for that. One, it means that we're more likely to get the change that we need, but also it's speaking to the survivors out there, of which I firmly believe there are way more than our estimates tell us. And it's like I always say in the training I deliver as well, don't ever stop asking a question, even if you're getting it, I don't want to talk about it. It is slowly starting to break down the taboo. And so it's really important that we continue to engage ministers. And that's what we're doing with Act on IICSA. IICSA recommended 20 key recommendations that would be needed to start child protection reform. First one of those was the implementation of a child protection agency. And as Chris knows, I've become slightly obsessed with this now. It's the one thing that I think once we get that, then we will be able to work on the other things. Yeah. So that's what we're asking for. And we're really looking forward to relaunching that campaign with our new government. When we're recording this, they've only been in post 10 days. So we'll be nice and let them get into their office before we start. But we're also really grateful that we know, at the moment you've got Jess Phillips, who's now Minister in the Home Office for this subject, Yvette Cooper, Alex Davis-Jones. We've met with all of them before we went into PERDA, and we're really pleased that they were so committed to making this happen. And once they've got their feet under the desk, so to speak, really hopeful that conversation is going to continue.
And we also met Jess Phillips at Channel 4 private viewing that we were there for the documentary with Emily Victoria and her mum. Chris, I can see you're patiently waiting.
Yes. I just feel, Lucy, that you've been very kind to our current government, and we do need to keep it like that until they prove otherwise. Hopefully not. But child protection, just in general, just keeps being pushed down the list of priorities. And at one stage, one day, it has to be on top of the list, because it just can't keep being ignored, because there's other stuff that is more prominent, because it's never been prominent, more so than when IICSA was actually active and alive. And if we couldn't get things done then, just keep my fingers crossed. So can you tell us a little bit more now about Check With Me First, please?
Yeah, that's a really good link, Chris, actually, because what I was going to say is I hear what you're saying, as you fully know. That's why we're here. But actually, over the weekend I was having a really good look. So we've done, and again, do provide the link to this, we've done a really detailed analysis of the manifestos of the three main parties, and none of them mention IICSA, none of them mention child protection specifically. Absolutely shocking, blah blah blah. But all of them, all of the policies, all of their key policies that they are concerned about in their areas, they are all addressing inadvertently or indirectly the impact of child sexual abuse. So we're talking about healthcare reform, we're talking about criminal justice reform, policing, all of these things, like the rise of shoplifting, homelessness, unemployment, education. Of course, some of it is simply we've reallocated funds in the wrong place, but actually a lot of this is we are creating traumatized generations who are unable to reach their full potential. And as such, as we were talking about earlier, we know that therefore they're more likely to end up needing those frontline emergency services. And that's just such a tragedy, because it's so preventable. And as you say, this is what got me into looking at the healthcare things. NHS London, said to us just before the pandemic hit, could we start looking at how we train staff who work with survivors? I mean, and it is very much the staff who work with survivors, not the understanding that we all talk to survivors every single day. And so I developed this program called Check With Me First, and it's just a really simple workshop for anyone who works in the NHS to just talk about the impact of sexual violence of any kind, potentially slightly heavier on non-recent abuse. So by that usually we mean child sexual abuse. Some people say historical, but we don't like that word. And it's been really successful, if I do say so myself. And so it's been a really exciting project. And then this also coincided with me having my children, and I've developed a maternity specific branch of it. Been contacted by just so many researchers, so many midwives, so many NHS staff that are like, we've been wanting to do something in this area for so long, and it's been so exciting because we've just been able to contribute to so many amazing research projects, looking at how we're training staff. We've had a couple of trusts where we have worked sort of intensively with them for a year, and they've trained every single member of their staff from admin all the way up to the most senior consultant. And their did not attend rates of their patients has dramatically dropped. Yeah. So people feel more believed and more respected. So often people say to me, well, hang on, that's all very well, but why would you have a trauma-informed program? Because how do you know who's been abused and who hasn't? And why does it matter? What's the worst that can happen if we all start being a bit kinder to each other?
Absolutely.
And we know, particularly, especially when you're looking at maternity, the majority of the patients would have experienced something directly or indirectly, because they're the statistics, whether we like it or not. So,
and something I've spoken about before, and Chris and I have covered this as well in a previous podcast. But if you were to look at my personal records in my pregnancy, they came across as normal run-of-the-mill pregnancies.
Of course,
but
yeah.
Actually, for me, they were absolutely huge triggers.
Yeah, of course.
Disassociated and everything. And it was afterwards, having young children and the enormity post-birth. I'm now responsible for my children, and I want to keep them safe and break the mold. And I remember making a decision. I didn't want to breastfeed my babies. But I had a midwife, even whilst in hospital, that refused to speak to me because I wouldn't breastfeed. So you can imagine that feeling of isolation and judgment.
We're just always making the victims not responsible for what happened to them, but also responsible for their recovery. You needed support at that time, and just by blaming you and making you feel worse than you already did. Obviously, that's just it's just, it blows my mind how ingrained our victim blaming is, and how we just don't want to see what's in front of us. And it's been really exciting in the maternity project, because also obviously women, I mean, I know certainly when I was pregnant, you don't really want to talk about it, because it might be a real time of hope and excitement and healing, or it might be, actually, I'm genuinely worried about my baby in the pregnancy. I don't want to talk about myself and take away from that. Or it might be, if I tell you, you're going to think I'm not a capable mum. So there's all of that. There's so many different reasons why people don't disclose. And I know it's now mandatory for us to ask if they're experiencing any sexual violence at the moment. By that, we're really referring to domestic violence. But we asked a question once in the booking appointments, and that's it. I'm really encouraged and inspired by the most amazing midwives I've met, which are now in the thousands doing this project, and all of them just have come up with the most incredible, creative, innovative ways to be able to communicate with women, make them feel safe, and make their pregnancies that bit easier. And I think if there's anything we can learn from experiences like yours, Beverley, is just, let's not let that happen to other people, and let's keep that conversation going.
And that's why we all advocate having these conversations, because we break the taboo, and silence only exacerbates it. So absolutely. Go on then, Chris, because I saw you're about to say something, and I got in.
I was just going to add here that we've done 3 podcasts now on pregnancy and birth and parenting, just because we felt that this was really important as well, before we even knew, Luce, that you were doing the work that you're doing. So it just really goes to show how we all do have an experience, a trauma impact, and by sharing that we can improve services for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, having a baby, I imagine, regardless of if you've experienced sexual violence, pretty traumatic anyway. You're carrying around another human, you're literally like, whichever way they get out, it's not pleasant. And it's I was about to say a question, but I absolutely don't. I'm amazed by those women that say it was such a wonderful experience. I'm like, that's great to hear. Not for all of us. So yeah. But you know, your body changes. You've got something inside you, even if it was put there consensually. You have aches and pains. I mean, I had hyperemesis, which is where you're always throwing up, as you remember with Chris at work, and I had to get sent home. Literally, I'd drink water and would just throw up. There's all these different things and complications, and then there's obviously no time to heal or recover from that, because as soon as the baby comes up, congratulations, isn't she wonderful? Look how cute she is, blah blah blah, and your emotional and physical pain is secondary, as it should be. The baby can't sit and you know, really needs you. But we really do need to go back to this idea of the continuity of midwives and care, and seeing the mum and baby as one, and as something that needs to be nurtured as a whole. Because without that, we're falling into that trap where we're treating the symptom and not understanding the root cause. And so you can have a really traumatic birth, but if you're given the right support and the healing afterwards, you can accept that that's what's happened to you. And we know that that's the case for sexual violence and child sexual abuse, but it's just many of our processes now in dealing with all of this is more traumatizing in some cases, or if not, re-traumatizing than the actual trauma itself. And I cannot count how many people I've worked with who have disclosed their abuse, reported to the police, gone through the criminal justice system and said, actually, that was worse than the abuse itself. I wish I hadn't done that. We have to change that, because that's why people aren't coming forward, because they don't want to experience that. And that is where this is a collective effort. And people who say, well, I don't know anyone who's experienced sexual violence, or it doesn't affect me. It does affect you, because it impacts all of society. So we all have a duty to do something about it.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you a little bit now about the Survivors Trust conference, Lucy, in September?
You certainly can. I think we have you coming to speak, Chris, as well.
Yeah.
That's so the Survivors Trust conference is on the 19th and 20th of September in Yardley Park in Staffordshire. God, I hope that's right. And it's I mean, yeah, you know, I'm a little bit biased, but Survivors Trust, just an absolutely incredible organisation that brings together. We're an umbrella organisation, so we've got agencies around the country, and we bring together that voice. We're able to speak to the people who work directly with survivors. We also run a helpline. We do lobbying. We do, you know, as I was saying, what I do, run Act on IICSA. We do loads of different things and loads of different training. It's just really exciting to get everyone together to talk about that. It's helpful for a well-being point of view for those of us that work in this, and to just touch base with people and share best practice. It's essential from a where do we go next point of view. And so we've got lots of people, influencers, and I don't mean social media influencers, I mean policy influencers. Government people come in, and there's a big focus this year on what we're doing after IICSA. And we're also obviously going to be looking a lot at online harms, which again I think is another. I love how we choose these language or these acronyms that don't quite say what we mean. Online harms covers child sexual abuse and the most awful categories of abuse that are online, but it also covers fraud you know, and so it's strange how we like to put it all together. But anyway, yeah, that's running in September, and everyone should come because it's going to be an absolutely brilliant event in a beautiful location. And there's going to be lots of opportunities for chats, and there's also going to be lots of like kind of breakout wellness bits and bobs to do as well. So it's not all going to be this heavy subject. Yeah.
So we'll put the link to that again underneath the podcast.
Yes.
And I've actually participated in one of the trainings of Survivors Trust as well, as a domestic violence and sexual abuse ambassador in the workplace.
Oh, fantastic.
Because this is another area in the workplace and the impact that it has, because we look at our work colleagues, again, there's this misnomer that work is work, home is home. And it's so separated. And yes, there's, you know, there has to be a balance there. But when it comes to experience of abuse, whether it's happening now or if it's non-recent, that comes into your workplace. And I remember years ago going to an HR networking event, and it was a workshop for personnel, and the language that was coming out in personal development one-to-ones, what the managers were feeding back and saying, oh, they're bringing all their, they're oversharing all what's happening from home, And the person actually taking that workshop, I had to pull them aside afterwards and say, you know, I can't believe you're saying that. If somebody broke their leg, you'd be there to support them. But when it comes to abuse or domestic violence, etc. So when I saw that training available, I went and did it and took part with the lovely Linda Lewis.
She's wonderful, isn't she?
She is. And it, you'd learn something. Nobody knows everything. And even I picked up some things and I was like, I never would have considered that.
Yeah, we've got some brilliant trainers, and I love just listening to everyone. And also, we're all learning all the time. Like trauma informed has become a real buzzword at the moment, and I don't think any of us truly are yet, because the culture's changing all the time and we're learning about it, and we're constantly always reading more research about it and learning about it. And that's why it's really exciting to be part of that team, because we're not saying we know exactly what to do. We're saying let's have the conversation, and Faye, our CEO, is very good at facilitating that happening.
Bev, what are we doing for time?
Well, we're okay. I'm watching it closely.
Fabulous.
So, Lucy, what now going forward for you personally?
For me personally, I'm going to carry on just doing what we're doing, really. I'm absolutely determined to ensure that we have a child protection agency and a government minister for child protection, which is very separate to the role that the current junior minister holds for children and families, and the role that the education secretary holds. We have well over 500,000 children being abused each year, and those children deserve someone speaking for them in the grown-up place of Parliament, where they can't, to make sure that this is addressed and stopped. And so I'm really committed to making that happen. But I also know that I could sit up all night and start shouting and run myself into the ground to do it, and it's not going to happen that way. So we need to carry on doing the best we can, being as kind and respectful to each other as we can, listening to each other, and we're gonna really keep championing the Act on IICSA message, which is let's not make IICSA disappear. After 8 years, 7,000 victims coming forward, let's make sure that we honour all that work. And then I'm going to carry on raising my girls, and hopefully when they're an adult, we don't have to have the conversation in quite the same way that we're having now. That's my aim.
Thank you, Lucy. And if anyone's listening now, and it's, they're not necessarily a survivor, maybe they're concerned about somebody else, or they want to know more about sexual abuse, and how they can also be supported sometimes. Because I know that in conversations I've had friends say, "What, somebody's disclosed to me. What will I do?" What message would you like to put out there to them, Lucy?
I mean, my message, which I'm sure will be very similar to many of your guests, is just you're not alone, because it is the most lonely thing. Of course, you're alone in the exact abuse you experienced and how it was orchestrated and the impact it's had. But knowing that this has happened to other people and you did nothing wrong, however much you were told you did, is just essential to acceptance and recovery. And there's loads of resources out there, and you don't need to disclose to anyone if you don't feel comfortable. You don't need to tell anyone, you don't need to report it, but you do need to make sure that you're looking after yourself, whatever that looks like for you. So on our Survivors Trust website, we've got an incredible section which has just got loads of resources, loads of information that you can start to understand what's happened and start thinking around it and the impact it's had. We've also got an incredible function where you can type in your postcode and all the free services in your area will come up. There's a lot of talk at the moment about horrifically long waiting lists for talking therapies. We know that talking therapy is the most effective a treatment, for want of a better word, for people who've experienced any form of sexual violence. So we also know that waiting lists are huge, but don't let that put you off, because there's lots of work to get these down, and it's just really, really important that you do reach out for help. You're not meant to. This wasn't meant to have happened to you anyway, and it's certainly, therefore, you're certainly not meant to know how to recover from it or do it on your own.
And what about people wanting to support but not knowing, frightened of saying the wrong thing? What would you say
Absolutely.
to them?
I mean, again, there is so much out there for that, and you can't take away someone else's pain or suffering, but you can just listen. And that's all we need to do. We want to, when someone tells us that they're suffering, we want to make it better. And so, well, you should do this or you should do that. And that's just a really natural response. But try to avoid doing that. Try to just listen, let the person go at their own pace. But again, we have loads of resources on supporting survivors. And there's loads of organisations out there as well, particularly for parents whose children have disclosed and remembering that they too are also victims.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, before we finish up, because we are coming to the end now, is there anything you would like to say or ask Lucy before we finish?
Well, obviously, I see Lucy a lot more than just on this podcast. So, no, I just think that what she's done so far in all of the work that she's doing is amazing, along with everybody else we have on here as a guest. They are all exemplary people, wanting to change the landscape for children, wanting better protection, but also wanting that specialist support for anyone that's gone through a trauma impact because of childhood abuse, because of domestic violence, whatever it is they've gone through. And I just want to say thank you and keep doing your good work, Lucy.
Well, thank you, and to you too, and getting this conversation out there. It's brilliant.
No,
it's
thank you.
To take some time out and have a chat about it all as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. And you get the last word before I do the end bit. So Lucy, any last words or thoughts that come to mind that you'd like to share as we close this episode?
Can I just say #act on IICSA?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And please do reach out. We're busy, but reach out. Please come and find us at the Survivors Trust. We're not hard to find, are we, Chris? So there's lots of always willing to talk. It might take a while to get back to people, but please, we're only going to solve this by sharing, having these conversations, even if we disagree with each other. It's just essential.
Sometimes.
Absolutely. It's healthy too. Well, for anyone listening, we will be sharing different links below, but also if you've got any additional questions that you want to ask Lucy, please email us on Breaking the Cycle 2stepforward@gmail.com. My last thoughts is, Lucy, lovely to see you again. For me, something that's always, I know has not been resonated with everybody, but one of the things that I always look out for is the IICSA benches that are available. They're all over the place. They're in various locations and some of the train stations in London. So please do go on the website and take a picture of yourself on the bench and share it, because I think they're really important, because they're places for us. I love a bench anyway, but they're very special, and it acknowledges all the hard work that's gone into IICSA. And yes, it is only a small step, but it is an important step, and it's there, and it's something tangible for people every day to be able to sit on and contemplate and maybe have a conversation.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Lucy. Thank you, Chris, as we come to the end of this episode, and look forward to hearing from anyone if you've got any further questions. Thank you.
See you all
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.